I was so angry. I was so angry. I couldn't believe this was even being allowed to happen in our justice system, in the American justice system. I was going to teach her to stay angry if I stayed angry. I was going to teach her to hold on to hate and bitterness and prejudice and so many other things, and pain and woundedness and brokenness. I was going to teach her to hang on to all of that if I chose to hang on to all of that. It's really important to just know that it's okay to continue to just want to work on, the things that keep showing up in your life. And they're going to keep showing up. They're not ever not going to show up. How we
Do you allow life to define you, or do you choose to allow life to give you the opportunity to refine yourself? And today we get the chance to speak with Michelle Renee. Michelle, welcome, and how are you, my dear?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm well. I feel really honored to be here and be a part of your show and get to for us to have a little chat and let your audience be a part of it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm grateful that you're here. I know that your latest achievement is your certification as a trauma coach. And then you also have your book, 9 Days, and we'll go into all of that. But Michelle, let's help our audience figure out who you are and why the message that you're bringing to them is so vital. Would you go into a little bit of your background, your childhood and growing up, and then we'll go further along so that they can hear what you have to share is so significant.
Oh, sure. I was born in Boston, in a little suburb of Boston, and ended up coming to California when I was about 8 years old and drove across country with 7 kids and just my mom. She was quite the Renaissance woman, and she actually was following our dad out here who had already come to California. I even early on back then, it's funny because when we get to the story of 9 days in my book 9 days, which is about a road trip, I think back to, that very first road trip across the country with my mom and sort of that feeling of freedom on the road and really the freedom that we had in those times away from my dad and his violent behavior. So I grew up with a father that was just full of a lot of rage. He was not an addict. He was not an alcoholic. He wasn't any of those things. He was a very broken, abandoned little boy that never healed his pain. He was brought to an orphanage and left there. And I think, that carried over into really the rest of his life and certainly into the way that he treated his family. And so growing up in that household was just a lot of control, a lot of violence, a lot of walking on eggshells, a lot of, that's where I began to really figure out how to people please. Because
Mm.
if I figured out how to please, make sure my dad was happy, whether it was, is his coffee sweet enough? Is his coffee blonde enough? Because he would say, I like it sweet and blonde, and little things like that. Is his ashtray emptied? Is the house clean enough? Are the dishes done? There were so many ways growing up that really embedded that people pleaser mentality in me that I ended up needing to deal with later. But I ran away right before my 15th or right before my 16th birthday and left home, moved in with a boyfriend, ended up having some pretty rough teen years. And of course, went straight into the arms of my very first boyfriend, who was also violent. And when I eventually sort of emerged from this, place of numbing myself out and doing anything I could to continue to run away from all that I had survived growing up, all that I had to sort of process and learn how to navigate growing up, I decided that I really didn't want to be in that environment anymore with the people I was surrounded with. And what I love about what I love about this even earlier on in my life is that I started getting this sort of inner call. And I didn't know what it was then. I think, I was too young to know what this thing was that was tugging at me to go find a place in nature to just sit where the quiet was and get out of the chaos. So I would do this. And before, I think, when I was really young, I found a place out on the right by where we lived on the outskirts of Boston. And when I was right around my probably middle school age, pre-middle school age, I found another place that I would just go sit in nature by this rock and listen to the stream. And I would be out there for the longest time by myself. I didn't even know what meditation was. But I know now that I had begun at a very early age to sort of listen to this inner call. Well, the same thing happened when I was at a party and I looked around and that same voice said, "You don't belong here. You need to leave. You don't belong here. You don't belong with these people." And I got up and I walked out and I never looked back. I ended up then quitting doing all drugs, walking away from everything, deciding I wanted to go fall back on my training that I had during high school, which was a certified nurse's assistant. I went from that to dental assisting because certified nurse assisting didn't work for me. Dental assisting certainly didn't work for me. I could not stand that job. And I eventually landed in banking. And that's where we get to my 13-year career that I really fell in love with and worked my way up from being a part-time teller to all the way to being an assistant vice president and running sales teams as a regional sales manager and eventually running the branch.
Honestly, that's really impressive, Michelle, when you describe your upbringing and all the challenges you had and being a runaway and then taking yourself through programs, then to get into a career in banking and begin excelling at it so that you show up in a different mannerism. For some of the audience that are listening, you mentioned the listening to the voice, the calling to go out into nature. Would you describe that a little bit so that people begin to understand what that means to begin to listen to themselves before we get into the wonderful things that occurred in banking and afterwards?
Yeah. I just wrote a poem about this recently, and sometimes it's the quiet whisper that comes at 12 a.m. You have to be really in tune with your own intuition, and that intuition in my mind is a divine intuition. It is the part of us that is a divine voice, that is that guiding voice, that sometimes it can be thundering and telling you run for your life, but sometimes it's a very gentle calling that you can't really, you're like, wait, what is this? And some people are like, oh, they brush it off. We all have intuition for a reason. And that intuition isn't just, there's the intuition that saves us from really dangerous situations. And certainly when I was at that party and I was surrounded by those kinds of people that were addicts, that were doing crazy things, that voice of intuition was certainly telling me to leave a dangerous situation. Not a dangerous situation like, guns were being pulled out and my life was in danger at that moment, but certainly my future and my life in a certain way was in danger. So when we're going into even dating situations, or we're going into a new job situation, or we're going into living in a new environment, whether it's a roommate situation or not, I really believe in checking in with ourselves and getting very, very quiet and asking the right kinds of questions to not only ourselves, but our higher self, and divine creator, God, whatever you want to call it, to be so in touch with that voice that we trust it explicitly. And it becomes our best friend. That is our therapist. That is our best friend. That is the thing or the person or the voice that is there to protect us in so many different ways. And for me, that voice has been my protector for many, many, many years. And we have to just be in tune with it and not shut it out. and not ignore it. We hear it all the time in dating. We're like, oh, I ignored all the red flags. Same thing. Life is full of red flags, but, and we ignore them for all kinds of reasons, because of the way we were raised, because of our programming, because of what a lot of people know as our filter, like the glasses that we're looking through, that filter that we're looking through, which is our past and our experiences and our lived experiences, really shade and color our decision making and our mindset. And so until we really get to a place where we're coming to terms with that, and we get to a place where we can get the noise to stop and really listen and really tune into that inner intuition and trust it, yeah, life can be a really bumpy road when we're just constantly ignoring all the red flags because we're, you know, we're too afraid to sit down and face all of our stuff and our pain and our woundedness and our programming, and sort through all that and heal all of the things in our life, so that we can then really, really begin to hear that inner voice and that calling, and not only hear it, but follow it.
I think you're so right. Most people attempt not to listen to that intuition, that voice, because they're not ready to face whatever is going on within them that's telling them, hey, there's other ways, there's other things you need to do, and they're just not willing. I've been there, learned my lessons, definitely like everyone else, growing through them and becoming a lot more in tune to the small voices that come up that tell you to do something. You go, no, and they go, no, go do that. That is
Yeah.
our intuition. And I point that out so well for people to understand that they have wisdom within them guiding them. I'd love to know how you got to excel in banking when you started off with rough beginnings, because that is a tough industry.
When I started off, what now?
When you started off in banking, how did you
Yeah.
excel? Because that is a very tough industry to excel in.
And back then, well, and back then too, I was like one of the only women back then. I was this 5'1", you know, 35-year-old woman, or 30 to 35-year-old woman, when I really worked my way up into an executive leadership position. And I was, you know, I was going toe to toe with, you know, middle-aged men that had been in the industry for a long time. And I'm telling them that things need to change, you know? So it was a very difficult industry back then. And I was able to excel. I personally believe I was able to excel because I am such a people person, and I'm very interested and curious about people, and I love human behavior, and I love interacting with people and learning about them and being curious about them. And because of that, I was able to build relationships. And when you look at almost any industry, anything that we do, it is very relationship focused. And if you don't have the ability to nurture and build relationships and be like genuinely interested and curious about people, it's going to be a lot tougher to be successful, because success really is dependent upon relationships in so many cases, right? And so for me, I believe it was my relationship building skills and my curiosity, which I'm curious about everything and everywhere and everyone. I'm one of the most curious people that I know. So I think that was how I was able to excel in that. For the people out there that own businesses or in leadership position, that carried over to my staff also. I was so invested in them as people, and I took, you know, old closets, old storage closets, and turned them into personal development rooms with lots of different books, not just on banking and business, but what about being a single parent? What about mindset? What about meditation? What about all these other things? So they weren't just sitting in the lunchroom watching soap operas. What if one of them wanted to go to a quiet place and have a lunch and read a book, or whatever? So I really, really invested in my staff too. And I was very, I was genuinely interested in helping them grow, even if that meant that they were going to eventually leave my banking center or my team. That was okay. I was really interested in wanting them to grow and be their best. And that carried over throughout my entire career. And I think more than anything, that is what really helped me to be successful. And I think that is still true today.
I'm going to throw you a curveball based on what I was absorbing. How did you learn to differentiate between people pleasing and being interested in a person?
Between people what?
People pleasing and being interested in a person.
Well, that's a good question. I love this question. And I have to say there is a fine line there. And what's interesting about my banking career that I understand now is that my suit that I wore every single day was completely a mask. I didn't understand the psychology of it for a very, very long time. And understanding trauma and childhood trauma and complex and generational trauma the way that I do now, and the psychology behind how I chose to survive, which going into this banking and this professional career has very much to do with me proving myself, which growing up in my home, I was constantly trying to prove myself and placate my dad, and my mom too, so that they would be proud of me. Banking was that as well. I wanted them to be proud of me. This was never about me or me being proud of me necessarily, but it was proving myself. So that was an underlying current always in my life and in my career. And the people pleasing was a part of that too. And I think that actually lent itself very well in my career because I was hiding behind my suit. I thought if no one could tell on the outside and I showed up this certain way on the outside, no one would be able to tell that I was a teen runaway train wreck underneath it all. And I hid all of that for the longest time. No one ever knew any of that about me for a very, very, very long time, which also means that I never dealt with any of that on any level. I ran away from it. I put on a suit and I hid behind that for years. And I think people pleasing was a big part of that. But I also do believe that my natural curiosity and love for nurturing relationships was equally a part of that as well. I don't know that they may have bled into one another, and crossed over. And I probably back then didn't know the difference. I know the difference now.
Thank you for that authentic answer and the ability for people to understand that we hide behind certain wear that we put on, certain masks that we put on. Thank you for saying that, Michelle.
Yeah.
Let's jump forward.
We hide behind a lot of things.
Let's jump forward.
We hide behind so many things, including, food and alcohol and drugs and sex and workaholism. And, there's so many ways that people are hiding and running and not dealing with what they need to be, really diving into and working through and healing versus hiding. Yeah.
I'd like to jump forward to the reason you even wrote the book. Would you take us through the events that led to that?
Yeah.
With the banking so that people really get it?
Yeah.
That trauma happens, but how do you deal with it, really?
It's, when you're busy the way that I was in a corporate career, the way that I was, I was jamming 12, 14 hours a day. And I would take my daughter to before school care and then get to work and then try to get there before after school care. So I wasn't late. So I was constantly go, 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 go. And what I didn't realize is that I was being stalked for 2 months. And the men and one woman who were stalking me discovered that I was the manager of the bank and that I had keys to the vault and that I lived in a very rural area surrounded by acres and acres of land without any neighbors close by. And they targeted myself and my daughter and broke down the door to our home one evening and kidnapped us, held us hostage, duct taped us, took my daughter from me at gunpoint and duct taped her and put what they told us were dynamite sticks on our bodies. And they threatened to murder us if I didn't follow their every instruction to the letter, which was to rob the bank for them the next morning.
I
Yeah.
can't even imagine such a situation. What was your mind going through at that point, especially with your daughter being held hostage with you?
I didn't believe we were going to make it out of that alive. I was preparing to die, and it was the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, terrifying moments of hours of my life. I mean, it was pure, absolute terror. And in those moments, however, I understood that if this is it for me, if I'm going to die, if this is going to be it for me, I need to make peace with my past, and I need to make peace with my whole life, and I need to prepare to die. And I was obviously begging them not to hurt my daughter. Please don't hurt her. I'll do anything. I mean, all of the things that you do when you're begging for your child's life and your own life, all of that was happening. We were held hostage for 14 hours in those initial moments of terror when you're screaming and you're crying and their gun is to your head and the gun is to your child's head. And you finally get to the point where the shock takes over. You just begin to understand that the only thing you can do is cooperate. That is your only chance. And that's what happened. And in the quieter moments of cooperation and waiting for the, impending situation that was coming up in the morning where I was going to have to leave my child and go rob the bank I managed. In those hours, it was really taking inventory. I was forced to take inventory of my entire life. And these guys broke down the door and they were really, really violent. What that ended up doing was bringing all of that violence from my childhood and my past and my dad back straight into my face, literally. And me finally having to really look at all of that and really start to have a conversation in those hours with God, creator, divine, whatever you would like to call it, and getting to a place of, my dad, understanding who my dad was, starting to think about my dad differently, asking God to show me who my dad was in his eyes and not my own. And those are the things that I really started to focus on, and where my mind went during some of those hours to make peace with everything and prepare to die.
My shoulders are tense, and I know part of your story, and I'm still tense listening to it. And for me, it's for people to understand what happens when you're needing to protect someone that you love and what happens within you. How do you go through those pieces and still be sane? Could you take us through the rest of what occurred in the next month, year? What occurred afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, when I ended up having to rob the bank in the morning, I really, the PTSD that took over our lives was so painful. It was so difficult to get through those days and months following what had happened. I ended up getting back to my house, finding my daughter duct taped up still in the closet. Then, then the trauma, then the PTSD, then that starts happening. Then the investigation starts and you find out that, these people are arrested. They're coming up with a bunch of lies to save themselves. Their attorneys are making up lies about me. And then there's more trauma that comes along with that, and the investigation and everything that goes along with all that was very traumatic. And I'm trying to manage my own trauma and manage my child and mother a child that I've never known. The child that I've known for 7.5 years was no longer. She you know, to put it bluntly, she was killed that night. That child never existed again. The one that was trusting and of the world and you know, so fun. And you know, now she's a child that's clinging to my leg and not speaking very much and scared of everything and wetting herself. And I mean, it was just, and I'm dealing and having nightmares and hearing doors and stuff slamming in her head and crying out of control with, you know, with flashbacks. It was horrific. And getting through those months was super, super difficult. And the main thing that got me through those very difficult months was my family and my friends, my very close friends, the family that I'm so, so close with. I'm so grateful for. And my therapist, we ended up with a therapist for 2.5 years that was an absolute angel godsend. I mean, I owe so much to this woman who was amazing to us. The other thing that was a big savior was really the FBI said these people are really dangerous. You should get out of town and move and wait for the criminal trial to happen. Well, they're like, we're going to do a risk assessment. We don't know how long it's going to take. And I said, well, I'm not waiting for a risk assessment. My daughter, we've been harmed enough. Like, I'm just going to get her to safety. I flew her up to her grandmother's in Alaska, and I didn't know what my next move was going to be. That voice came to me again in Alaska while I was trekking across the glacier. And I walked away from the group that I was with and heard that inner call again that said, go back to San Diego and give everything away and drive back to Alaska. And that's what I did. And I was arguing, like I was literally arguing on this glacier. I'm like, nope, not doing that. Nope, I'm scared of my own shadow. I was just kidnapped and held hostage. Whatever this voice is, I'm arguing, whether you want to say it yourself or what, but whatever it is you want to consider it, I'm arguing with it going, that is not happening. This voice kept saying, do you trust me? And I said, yes. They said, it was like, then you'll do this. And I had no idea or understanding about why this was being asked of me. I was like, this is crazy, but okay. And that's a part for your audience that they need to know. Sometimes this call, you're not going to understand it. You're not even going to know why you're being called to do this thing or go in this direction. It might not make sense to you. But when you get to the point of really trusting sort of your purpose, and you're trusting that this is that voice of purpose, and that's a good way to kind of, you know, that's a good way to recognize what this is, in my opinion. And I just began to follow this voice of purpose. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this thing. I come back, give away all of my stuff almost, except for what was really meaningful to me. And I hit the road with hardly any money, lots of miles on an old small SUV. And I ended up driving from San Diego to Alaska alone with my dog. And that is what 9 Days is about. My book, 9 Days, is about my road trip from San Diego to Alaska. And everything that happened on that road trip, the healing, the people that I met, the understandings that I came to about my life and about my purpose, and also the longing for understanding about the people who did this to us, really began to be a seed that was planted on the road trip that began to grow. And that understanding was, I wanted to know what happened to them. I wanted to know how they got to a place so desperate that they could do this to a mother and her child. And that seed was planted on the 9-day trip to Alaska. And that's really what 9 Days is about. And in the end, it really is about how that seed of understanding began to grow and what that led to and what that has led to up to today, most recently when we were in San Quentin prison.
So much to unpack in what you just told. I would like to emphasize one piece that you kind of glanced over in this journey, where you were the victim, yet there were lies being told against you, and you're already going through trauma.
Oh, so much.
And I know a lot of individuals that have been wronged and how they react. How did you even work through that, Michelle? Especially you're already in trauma.
I was so angry. I was so angry. I couldn't believe this was even being allowed to happen in our justice system, in the American justice system. But I soon realized that it's not called the American justice system. It's called the criminal justice system. And that is because the criminals in so many cases are favored, and that is over victims. And that was certainly the case in this trial. It was heartbreaking to learn. It was very upsetting. It caused people to question my character and my integrity, and question me as a mother. And those lies that they were telling were that I was the ringleader, that I met this guy in a grocery store and recruited him into this plan, and that we ended up having an affair. All of these things that they were saying without any proof, any evidence, anything whatsoever to support what they were saying. And in a court of law, you know, the prosecution has to have proof to bring a case forward. The defense does not.
Mm.
And it's a very broken system. I learned a lot about the criminal justice process. I learned a lot about how victims are treated very poorly in our courts of law. It's heartbreaking to know that happens every day. It's called dirtying the victim. You do anything you can to discredit the victim, even with things from my past that had nothing to do with what happened. They were irrelevant. They were 20 years ago. My partying days, my bankruptcy after my divorce, like, they brought everything into this that they could to make me look like the most horrible person in the world, just to put these people back out on the streets. It was totally okay for them to do that to me, according to the court process and the court laws. And they did this with 3 confessions. And one of those confessions, there were 2 separate trials. The first trial, the confession wasn't allowed to be heard by the jury. I mean, this person confessed on camera, video confessions, written confessions, everything. It was thrown out because her co-defendant, her boyfriend, did not confess. So they didn't allow anything that implicated him because he hadn't confessed. And so she cut a deal, and her confession was never heard, and she ended up being acquitted. It's the most broken system you can imagine. It was very difficult to get over, you know, and work through my anger and a confusion about how is this even possible, related to, you know, what happens in our courts every single day to victims. It's very sad.
That's a lot, and you're right. I have attorneys in my family, and I hear a lot of the injustice that goes on in our system. How did you, through that journey of 9 days, how did you begin to turn yourself around into a compassionate person that you are? Because a lot of people end up staying in the anger, and they become the prisoners of their own lives. How did you turn it around so that others can really see that you don't need to stay there?
My daughter was the catalyst for all of it. As a mother, it's my responsibility to not cause greater harm to her. I couldn't prevent what happened that night, but I could prevent further harm being done to her by how I chose to model recovery from pain. I was going to teach her to stay angry if I stayed angry. I was going to teach her to hold on to hate and bitterness and prejudice and so many other things, and pain and woundedness and brokenness. I was going to teach her to hang on to all of that if I chose to hang on to all of that. Or I could teach her all the things that we could learn from this. Could we learn to be more grateful? Could we learn to be happier every day? Could we learn to live our lives in a more authentic way without hiding behind a suit or a mask? Could I teach her those things? Absolutely, I can teach her those things. Can I teach her that just because 3 men of color did what they did to us, that we should be afraid of all men of color?
Mm.
I could have taught her that too. But that was an absolute hard no for me. I wanted to teach her that we don't judge the masses by the actions of a few. We don't hang on to hate and anger and pain. We can decide what we can learn from that and how to put that hate down so that our hands are now open and not filled up and hanging on to hate and anger. What are you able to grasp onto when you're holding on to all of that? Nothing. Nothing. So you can choose to contract and hold on to all that stuff. And this is what it looks like when you're holding on to something. It's a fist, right?
Yeah.
Or you can choose to expand your life, expand your mind, expand your entire world, expand and live with your soul wide open, and give yourself permission to be free to grasp onto other things in life that are going to benefit you. This hate and this anger, one night, am I going to let that one night of my entire life and what happened, am I going to let that one night control and rule the rest of my life in a negative way? Absolutely not. I'm going to allow that to expand me in every single way possible. And understanding and compassion is really a big part of that. But the number one reason why is because on the road trip, I started for that 9 days when you're alone, driving 4,200 miles, and a lot of it on paved dirt roads, and sleeping in your car and in a tent, and eating out of cans. I learned a lot about myself, and I had a lot of conversations with God on that trip, and I listened a lot on that trip, and I really began to understand the weight of my responsibility as a mother, to raise my child to not stay stuck in her trauma.
There's so much in that, in the depth of wisdom that you went to in that journey of 9 days, from being angry to conversating with God and listening.
Yes.
What were some of the wonderful things that you made a choice to do to continue that healing? Not just for you, but for your daughter. What were some of the things that allowed you to expand and become even more open today and so positive and so nurturing?
My podcast is called Soul Wide Open for a reason. That's my entire life. That is my life motto. And that's the subtitle of my book, Learning to Live with My Soul Wide Open After Violent Trauma. And I decided that I wanted to know what it was like not to be held hostage any longer by my past, my childhood, all of it. I didn't want to be held hostage by any of it anymore. And it's funny because you mentioned people pleasing. I am in a constant state of self-learning. I am in a constant state of self-awareness, like trying to, increase my level of self-awareness, increase my level of self-understanding. And I very recently came across some situations, and I did a podcast on this, about how I still slip into that people-pleasing mode sometimes. The difference now is, and everybody, you're like, oh, you never deal with this again. No, I still deal with things, but guess what? I catch on to it like that and go, okay, that's what this is. What led me to this? what is the root of this? I need to take some time and dive into this. I've got a little more work to do in this corner of my heart or this corner of my soul. You know, I think being constantly in that state of wanting to self-improve for yourself to get to that place of living your best life, your best, highest purpose-driven life. It's really important to just know that it's okay to continue to just want to work on, you know, the things that keep showing up in your life, and they're going to keep showing up. They're not ever not going to show up. How we deal with them and how quickly we recognize them is really the trick, right? Is really the key to, you know, continuing to improve and evolve. But the things that I really started to do was giving myself freedom to be just authentically 100% Michelle, and not doing everything constantly. Will this make somebody proud of me? Will this make somebody proud of me? Will this make me not look like a teen runaway train wreck? Guess what? Part of me is a teen runaway train wreck, and I love her, and I'm okay with it. And I invite her to go with me everywhere. We're on the road trip together. And I remember that one time when I was younger, I got dared to go skinny dipping in my friend's backyard pool. It's the only time I'd ever done anything like that. Of course, I got dared, so I got to. Back then, I was, you know, I was like, I got to do it. But I hadn't had a sense of the freedom of who my personality, my true, authentic personality is. I'm a bit of a hippie. You know, I just am. I'm a total gypsy. Like, I just am. It's who I am. I was not in touch with that part of myself forever because I was embarrassed of her. And I thought that she wasn't somebody that anybody would ever be proud of or respect or want to hire. I mean, there's a lot behind that, right? And when you get to the point where you give yourself permission to love all of you, and you have that freedom on that road trip, I stripped down butt naked and went into a lake and have never felt like I had been more free, and like this was this baptism into finally loving every part of myself and being okay with that and being proud of her. I love her. I like that side of me. Is that who I am every second of every day? No, I have multi-layered. We're all very multi-layered. We're not one-dimensional. And so I really began to give myself permission to love all of me. And if anybody else doesn't like her or like that part of me or isn't proud of that part of me, I really don't care. I have no attachment to what other people like or don't like about me whatsoever, because that is their lens. What they like and dislike about me is about them, not me. I'm my only thing. I tell my daughter this all the time. We are responsible for our part. That's it. We have to do our part, and we do our part to the best we can, and we live our best, most authentic life that we can. And that's our only that's our responsibility. We're not responsible for what other people think about us. We're not responsible for what other people choose to say about us, like the courts and whatever. It's not personal. I'll give a tip. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Is called The Four Agreements. Changed my life, this book. I love this book. And one of the four agreements is don't take it personal. It's not personal unless you make it personal. If you choose to make it personal, then it can be personal to you. But you can also choose to not make it personal. And I've chosen just to not make it personal.
I love you, Michelle. You're preaching to the choir. I love you.
Thank you. I love you back.
I hope people are really listening and understanding that
Me too.
your journey is your journey and it's not someone else's, and you can't control their lens. You can only show up as you. And that's huge.
Huge. Game change for me. That is game changer, mic dropper, whatever you want to say. That is it. That to me is the, you know, you call it the secret if you want. That to me is the secret. That's it. And that leads to more joy. That leads to me. Yeah, I just went to a music festival this weekend, a 3-day music festival by myself. Because my friend couldn't go at the last moment, and I could sell the ticket or I could just choose to go and let my gypsy music loving self just go enjoy the music and meet people. It was absolutely fabulous. I met the best people that I got down in the very front of the stage. I had a ticket that was in the pit right in front of the stage. I was in hippie gypsy heaven all weekend.
I would have loved to have been there with you, in spirit at least. Michelle,
Yeah.
when did you make the choice that you're gonna write to the people that actually harmed you?
This was in, I mean, this was 10 years after the incident. We decided to write a letter. Bria and I wrote this letter together, actually. We sat right next to each other, we wrote it together. And I decided that that was the final, I was actually doing a music video on healing. A band had gotten in touch with me after hearing my story and said, we really want to do a music video about healing from trauma. And we want to make you part of that. And so part of that, I said, you know what, if we're going to really talk about healing, the final piece of healing is truly letting go of all of the negative attached to the situation and just focusing on everything we gained instead of everything we lost. And in order to do that, I talked to Bria and I said, I really want to write one of them a letter and say, we're not hanging on to any of the negative. We don't hate you. We don't see you as a monster. We completely release you and ourselves from anything holding us hostage related to the situation. And she said, great idea. I think that's a great idea. Let's do it. And so we did. We wrote a letter to one of them. And we didn't expect him to, we didn't know if he would receive it. We didn't know if he would read it. If he did receive it, we certainly didn't know if he would ever even respond. Had no idea. And part of the music video was the very end of the music video as I'm dropping the actual letter in the mailbox and walking away. And we dropped it in the mailbox and that was it. We kind of forgot about it, actually. I never really thought about it after that because we didn't write it for him. We wrote it for us. We wrote it as our final way of releasing and dropping any of the chains that were still attached to us from that incident so that we could really just, live our lives truly free from it. And so we wrote the letter. Well, during the pandemic, I get an email out of the blue that says, we are in receipt of a letter from this person in response to the letter that you wrote him years ago. Would you like to receive the letter? I was like, you need to overnight that thing. Like, you get that letter to me right away. I need to see this letter. And so they did. They sent us the letter. I called Bria and I was like, it should be here. So she would come to my house every day because at this point I'm living alone in a high-rise downtown. She's got her own life going on. So she would come every day and we'd wait for the mail together. And as soon as it got in, I would videotape her going to the mailbox to see if it was there because I want to capture all the moments, And it finally shows up. And I set up the camera on a tripod and I hit record and we open the letter and we record reading it together. And it was unbelievable. This 3-page letter that was really thanking us for changing his life. And he said, I destroyed your life and you helped me put my life back together. And he said, you humanized me. You helped me restore who I am to my core. I mean, this letter is, and actually the letter is in my book for anybody who wants to read the full letter. It's in my book. And yeah, it was really, really remarkable. And at the end of the letter, it said, I'm wanting to meet face to face through the Victim Offender Dialogue program. I welcome this and I want this. Maybe this can be a start. He said, this can be a start. And sure enough, we ended up meeting with him face to face with 2 of his family members. We ended up meeting one of our other attackers at San Quentin prison as well with his mom, who had not seen him the entire time he was incarcerated. And the healing that has gone on in these men's lives because of our letter is remarkable, honestly. And I get really emotional about it because this is my purpose. The healing that is happening and the message of understanding and compassion, and how these men have turned their lives around in a remarkable way. One of them's now out of prison. He just got off parole, and we met face to face recently about some work that we might be able to do together. And he's getting ready to, once a week, every Friday, he's now going to be a mentor for at-risk youth and talking to them about his life and how he ran away at 13 and joined a gang, and the trappings of all of that, and the good that he's doing in the world, and the spiritual, intelligent, wonderful man he is today, that was really triggered by our letter and our compassion and our love and understanding. Is it's remarkable, and I feel really honored that I was chosen for this message.
It's incredible the wisdom that you have within all of this, Michelle, to understand that you gave him the ability to humanize the individual, because generally isn't that what occurs for across the globe? When we begin to destroy each other, we don't humanize the other person and their circumstances. And you said something beautiful, that you made a choice to look at what you gained, not what you lost through this process. In that letter, how does your daughter feel about all of this?
Oh, I have chills right now. She is an exceptional human being, this woman. She has become a woman that I admire. She's my hero. She is the biggest cheerleader for them. And the one that she spoke up with, she spoke up at Robert's parole hearing, and she was the one who asked the judge to let him go home. And he was the one who attacked her. And she met with him face to face for the first time when we went up to go meet him. And her first words out of her mouth was to ask him, "How are you? How are you doing?"
That gives me chills.
She's remarkable. And that is evidence of the choice that I made as her mother, and how I chose to heal through this, and how I chose to navigate all of this. This is the example that we want to set for our children, not the opposite.
Michelle, why did you make the choice to go get certified in trauma?
You know, I wanted to talk about, after thinking about their trauma, and after learning about their trauma and their childhood trauma and their generational trauma, actually, as well. I'm so curious. I told you early on, I'm a very curious person. I decided I wanted to know about trauma from a very intellectual and educational perspective, and not just an experiential perspective. I've experienced trauma. I know trauma very intimately because of my lived experience with it. But I didn't know trauma from a very intellectual perspective or psychological perspective. And I really wanted to dive deeply into it to understand it even more, so that when I'm talking to other people about it, it isn't just sharing my experience. It's really, again, wanting to get to a place of understanding. Understanding is so important when we're healing. We want to understand not just about ourselves, about the other people who harmed us. What was it that caused them to do this? What is the understanding of trauma from a very psychological perspective, and almost even, you know, a very physical level. I wanted to understand trauma on every single level. So I decided to study it and get my trauma-informed certification, so that when I'm talking to other people about it, I have a level of understanding instead of just somebody that experienced it in their life.
Because you do a lot of talks, don't you?
I do, but I would like to do more. I mean, I'm just now getting back to it after many years of being away from it, because my daughter was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she had a very catastrophic onset. I had to walk away from everything for a very long time and just become her caregiver and be there to support her, and start my company, Verb Media Group, and teach myself everything I can learn about videography, photography, and content creation so that I would have a flexible enough schedule that and a flexible enough career that I could be available to take care of her and help and support her, and also give her a job that would be flexible enough for her too, which she's been my executive assistant for almost 4 years now.
She's been wonderful in the emails back and forth to connect to do this.
Yeah,
How is she now? How is she feeling now?
she's good. She just got married. She's excited about the future. They're trying to have a baby. They want to start a family. She's very happy. Her MS is, she hasn't had a relapse in 8 years. And she just is recovering from a surgery related to some damage to her foot and her leg because of her MS paralysis. So she's doing really good, but she's walking, driving. She has most of her vision back in her left eye. She doesn't have peripheral, but she can see kind of through she can see through like a pinhole in her left eye. So she's got some vision. She's got some deficits and weakness on the left, but pretty much that's it. Other than that, she's walking, she's driving, she's thriving, she's happy. Yeah.
What an amazing woman you raised.
Yeah, really. I feel like, man, I did something right to get so blessed with this kid. I mean, she's just amazing.
Michelle, what was it like meeting the families of the individuals at present?
It was such a blessing. I mean, I learned about their generational trauma. I learned what happened to them. And that question had always been something very present in my life since I started wondering about them on the road trip. What happened to them was something that was recurring for me, a question that was recurring. And meeting them answered so many questions related to that. And meeting them gave such a sense of oneness, excuse me, oneness in this shared experience. Because what happened didn't just happen to me, it happened to them too. It happened to his family. It happened to our family, not just Bria and I. What happened to us has an absolute ripple effect. And hearing how it affected them and them addressing these men and telling them what it did to their family as much as what it did to our family was incredible. The healing, the forgiveness, the tears, the laughter, everything about those meetings, going in there with an open heart, an open mind, an open soul, with only grace, no judgment, nothing but grace and compassion and understanding and listening and sharing. That's it. You don't go into a meeting like that with any other motive. We're a clean slate here. And we went in like that. We went in carrying a peace lily plant into the room. We were hysterical because this is who we are as a family. We come walking in with a gift bag with tissue paper coming out of it, with a gift for one of the guys, a book that we thought he would really like, and a peace lily for his mom for the room, because we were going in there focused on peace, focused on healing. We had nothing else mattered to us.
If I put you right now in front of a group of young men and women that are beginning their life and they've been through rough childhood, we'll just keep it at rough childhood.
Yeah.
What would you say to them to move forward and really pick up their life?
That's a heavy question because it's not a cookie cutter answer, because every single person that has gone through a rough childhood, they don't process it the same. So the answer is going to be different for each individual person in that room. But as sort of a general message, again, I would say what happened to you is no longer happening to you unless you allow it to continue to happen to you. The power to stop this and the power to stop allowing the trauma to control your life and you now flip that script and change that narrative and say, I am now going to be the person in control of my traumatic experience and what that continues to do in my life. Is it going to continue to wreak havoc? Or am I going to choose to begin to extract the lessons and carry those things forward? Or am I going to choose to carry the chaos forward that is going to continue to wreak havoc on my life? In general, in terms of a general message to an entire room, I would say the choice is yours right now in this very moment, in this very second, to say, I am no longer going to allow what happened to me in the past that is no longer happening to me anymore. I am not going to let that continue to control my life. And that's where we have to get to the point and the place in our healing where we tell ourselves when we're when we're triggered, we have to stop and say, I'm being triggered by this. Recognize the trigger. Recognize what the trigger is causing in you. Is it causing you to eat something bad? Is it causing you to be violent and lash out to somebody? Is it causing you to want to go drink more alcohol? What is that trigger causing you to want to go do? Recognize the trigger. Recognize what it is. Whether it's what somebody said to you that reminded you of something your dad said to you that made you feel like a piece of crap. I understand that. I've been called that so many times in my life by somebody that was supposed to love me. Okay, so we have to understand what the trigger is, what that trigger is causing us to want to go do, to numb that out or run from or hide from or silence whatever this is. No, we want to let that scream as loud as possible because that's that wounded child in us that's standing up screaming for help. And they're screaming to be heard. And they're screaming at you saying, what just happened? That hurts me. Somebody please listen to me. When I'm saying that I'm hurting. And if you go run and you go numb that out, it means you are silencing that inner child and telling them that their voice doesn't matter. But when you say, I'm going to stop and listen to that inner child, and I understand that that caused that inner child pain, and it is now my responsibility to take care of that child and listen to that child and say, I hear you, I get you, I understand you, but guess what? I got you. I'm now going to protect you. I'm now in control. I'm now the one that's going to take you to therapy, or I'm going to take you to Disneyland, or I'm going to take you hiking, or let's go roller skating, or whatever it is that makes you feel joy and brings joy to that wounded inner child and makes that inner child feel important and heard and understood. That is where you need to put your focus, and that you can do that in a split second.
Thank you for that. And thank you for really saying that they're not cookie cutters also. And that's what a lot of individuals do as we generalize across a race, across a genre, anything. And we begin to lose because we're doing that. So thank you for pointing that out and giving them the ability to go, you have the responsibility, which is a positive thing.
Huge. It's so, and you know what? The responsibility is fun. Like, you can really make this, it isn't a drag. It isn't a bummer. It isn't like, oh my God, this is so heavy. It can be if that's what you decide it's going to be. The whole point of this is that you're the decision maker. You get to choose what label you're going to give this, how you're going to feel about something, how you're going to move forward. Like, you get to choose. You can make this fun. You can be like, oh man, I get to reinvent myself. I finally get to be the person I can envision your best, happiest self. You get to choose how you're going to create. Is that going to come overnight? No, it's going to take time, but you actually get to choose that part of this can be fun. And part of it can be really, really hard too. I get that doing that deep, deep work can be really hard because you've got to be super honest with yourself about everything, how you've contributed to your challenges. Like, I contributed to my own challenges. My childhood was the foundation of a lot of that, but I contribute. You've got to be honest with yourself. And you get to this place where you're finally like, oh my gosh, okay. I envision myself walking into a room like this. How am I going to get to a place where I'm going to be this person, where I feel this way about myself? And I look in the mirror and I see this person instead of this brokenness all the time. We have the power to create that. We have the ability to do that. I have every excuse in the world to let myself just go and be miserable, and I have every excuse in the world to be angry and be pissed at life and whatever. Nope, that is not an option. And every person has the ability to make that choice.
I remember teaching a class 2, 3 years ago, and that question kind of came up. And I said, you have to take responsibility. And the person I said, for the negative stuff, said, especially the negative stuff, because that's your chance to turn it around and not continue to carry it as your burden. So thank you for saying these things, Michelle.
Oh my God, we are on the same page.
What is next for you, Michelle?
Next, I'm really hoping to, I'm not even going to say hoping, I take that back. My intention is to work with Robert, is to work with one of our attackers, and spread a really positive message of healing from both sides. My intention is to share his story, his remarkable redemption story, his remarkable transformation and healing story. I want to share his story. It's not just my own. I feel that his story and their transformation and their healing stories are just as important to the world as our own. And it is my intention to share his story with the world and do some really incredible work together, and to really, have my book 9 Days turn into a project that will inspire millions and millions of people through film or a documentary or something of that nature. And just continue to write, continue to grow my podcast, and continue to grow the community, the healing community that I've started, which is Soul Wide Open, through my podcast and through online groups and things like that. So that's really my entire, soul focus and what I believe my purpose is.
I love all of that, because that's not only your healing, that is the healing of so many individuals, to
Yeah.
stop treating each other like cookie cutters and really move forward. Before I ask the last couple of questions, what is the best way for people to connect with you, Michelle?
They can go to my website. It's michelle-renee.com. Instagram is a great way to connect with me. I really enjoy connecting on social media. I'm one of the people that I really enjoy social media. And I think the reason why is because people that have gone through trauma and are very creative like I am, I'm ultra creative, to talk about it and share the way that I do helps me process it. It helps bring it from here and outside of myself, and it helps to sort of give it a home outside of myself, which I really enjoy that aspect of it. So social media is a great way to connect with me. And Instagram, I'm very active on Instagram, and it's _ Michelle Renee _ You could just find me by typing in Michelle Renee, I'm sure. And yeah, those are the two best ways to get in touch with me. And you can get 9 Days on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere where they sell books. Bookstop, which is a really good one if you want to support, local independent bookstores. You can get it there as well. But Amazon's really easy. You can get it in multiple countries, but just Amazon.com and just search Michelle Renee 9 Days. And I would love it if you pick up a copy and leave a review. Would be great.
Michelle, what do you believe is the best thing that has occurred to you, or that you've created, let me rephrase it, recreated for yourself because of the events of that night?
The best thing I have created, obviously my daughter. I've created, because of my choices that were very intentional, raising her through trauma, I was able to help build up this remarkable woman that she's become today. That's obviously my number one. That will obviously be my only number one ever. But I think, you know, besides that, I believe the greatest thing that I've been able to create out of all of this is a life that is centered around compassion and love and understanding. And I can't imagine living my life in any other way whatsoever in the relationships now that we have with the people that, you know, terrorized us, I think is unique, and a lot of people won't understand it, but that's okay. I'm excited for what's to come out of all of that, and also creating a life that is. I mean, I just live my life for. I'm very authentic. I'm wide open, and I think living my life wide open is such a blast. That would probably those are my top three.
Nice, very nice. Is there anything that you'd like to say that I didn't ask so that we don't get off this podcast and go, why didn't Rima ask me this thing?
No, I believe the one thing too that I think a lot of people need to understand is that when they live their life by fear, because going through trauma causes so much fear, we didn't really tap into the essence of fear being such a cause for so many people to develop a way of life that really has no freedom. Fear will steal your freedom. And so I would really want to urge your audience to look at different ways that they can begin to understand fear, let go of fear, how fear is interfering in their life and not allowing them to live their life, you know, wide open with as much joy as they can possibly have, and really choosing happiness, because that fear and happiness can't really coexist. So really looking at what you're allowing fear to do in your life, and how much of that fear is not real. A lot of our fears that come into play in our life that restrict us aren't even, they're not even real. They're kind of made up in our mind, and we've kind of made them up and adapted to this, or adopted this new way of living in fear, that is like a replay of a tape that isn't actually based in right here in this moment right now, that isn't even reality. So I would really urge your audience to really begin to take a look at that as well.
I'm actually going to ask you, how did you tap into that to delve into the fear a little bit more?
Again, therapy was a huge thing for me, really looking at what's happening right now. And once you're triggered, like I said, what is the trigger? What is this causing? It's causing me to feel this fear. Is this fear reality, or is it not reality? Is this fear based on something that happened 5 years ago? Or is this fear based on something that happened when I was a child that actually hasn't happened to me in many years? Why am I still allowing this fear to have any space in my life at all? I'm reacting to something that is causing me fear that happened when I was a child. This is not, you are not focused on the current moment. In the current moment, where are you? What are you wearing? What are you eating? What are you doing? Come, bring yourself into the current moment and understand you are no longer in that place where you need to live in survival or fear mode at all. You're not there anymore. And it's up to you to train your mind and your nervous system and reset your nervous system back to understanding that you are no longer in that place where you have to live by fear and survival. You're not there anymore. So get yourself to a place where you every day understand you're not there anymore.
And drop the mic. That is a definitely drop the mic moment. Michelle, thank you so much for your authenticity, for your generosity of your time and energy today to be with me.
Thank you.
For our incredible audience, please remember, our attitude always determines our altitude in life. How far we are becoming and growing is all up to us. Michelle, thank you. Love you.
Thank you.